Okay, so we're going to look at texturing this Nalgene bottle and producing a few texture maps and looking at how those maps relate to different attributes within the shaders. So let's start. We're gonna texture this base here first. So I'm really just going to hide these two things up here. We don't want to look at them. And this bottle is very simple, right? But you'll notice that it is two sides. We have an inside and an outside. So we're going to see how that affects what we do. So back to here, we've got our UV layout already exists. And so let's begin. So the first thing we want to do here is we want to check and see we want to check our reference and look at what we are trying to replicate. All right. So I'll bring that in here. Here is this blue Nalgene bottle. I like the blue color. And I'm going to look at this reference and I'm going to make a few observations about it. All right. First, obviously, yes, it is blue. Okay. That's a good first step. Second, these little reflections here are telling me that this is a shiny plastic. Okay. So this is a very shiny, very glossy plastic. As I look across this surface, I notice that the logo here does not necessarily share the aspects of the shininess. It's maybe difficult to see in this image here. However, having a bottle, looking at it, you can clearly see that the screen printing used to create this label is of a different kind of reflective quality than the bottle itself. So we're going to have to take that into consideration. But first, let's take a look at creating our general broad strokes sort of shader for this, the clear blue. Okay, let's slide this out of the way. So looking back at here, the first thing we would like to do is create a shader. Okay, so I've got something, let's see here, I want to go into here. Here's our hypershade. So I'll clear out my hypershade using this erase here, clear my work area. Now, what I want to do is make a decision here. What kind of surface do I want to be creating? All right, it's going to be a Maya surface for the purpose of this video, and it is, like we said, it was a shiny surface, right? If we look back at our reference, you can see shiny surface, right? So when we look at our shader options, the ones that we primarily want to be looking at, the Blinn, the Lambert, things like that. The Lambert has no specular quality to it, right? So that's not going to help us out. The Blinn is where we start introducing a specular quality. So let's start there. Let's create this Blinn. And I'm going to look back at my bottle, and there's many ways to apply this. My preferred method is really to select the object so that I know what I have selected here. I know that this is going to be my target. I'm going to come back over to my hypershade, find my Blinn, and I'm going to right click on my Blinn, and I'm going to go up to assign material to selection, right? That to me is the clearest way to get the material on there and be happy with it. Okay, so here we are with the shader applied to the bottle now. Okay, we see we have a specular highlight, and so now we want to adjust this shader. Now you notice because the bottle is selected, I don't have anything loaded here or my attribute editor that's going to be of assistance. In this situation, we can go back to the hypershade and select the shader. That's a clear way of doing it. Another way to do it would be to click on the object whose shader you want to start affecting. And besides the marking menu that we have up here, we can slide right down to this menu and go to Material Attributes. And that will load into the attribute editor the material that we've just put on there. Okay, so first thing we want to do is we want to make it blue. Okay, very simple. We can click on this color swatch and it brings up this little color selector. Now, for the ease of efficiency, Autodesk has decided to make this color picker disappear if you choose to move your mouse off of it. And you see, that way, as you start moving faster, it's click, select color, slide off, move on. There's no deliberation there. If, however, you want something a little bit more persistent, it's very easy to double-click. And there you'll get a persistent color picker. In this case, we can choose whatever color we wish to choose. I'm going to select a blue that I think is just somewhere in the zone. I'm not too concerned about that. We're not going to be picking off of our file texture right now. So there we go. That's blue. Okay. Oh, my mistake. So we go back to material attributes. I'm going to just choose it right here. Give ourselves a nice color blue, and there we go. Okay, we have our blue. So now, obviously, the next thing to do would be, well, it is a transparent object, right? So we can add some transparency. These are all things we can just sort of say, all right, if we want just a blue clear bottle, we can start doing this here. Transparency, fairly transparent, right? Looking at this, okay, we can clearly see back to the other side. We do have some, it's not completely transparent, obviously, we're retaining the color. And if you see, if we go all the way to white, we'll just lose everything. But we can back off on that, right? Come back here and give ourselves a nice, like a nice rich transparency. That looks pretty good right there. Okay. So next, we're going to take a look at maybe this specular highlight that we have going on up here, right? Right now it's just here. So one thing that I do find annoying, right, is that this wireframe is constantly selective because we're constantly choosing the material attributes of the selected object, and that gets loaded into the attribute editor. One way to get rid of this, if you notice down here at the bottom of the attribute editor, there's a set of 3 buttons. The select button will select the node that you're currently editing. And in this case, I can select it, and now my material is selected, and I can continue to look at this however I want and just worry about my material. So I'm going to roll down here and check my specular shading model here down at the bottom. So because of the level of focus of this, right, that's the focus of these highlights tells to me that the eccentricity is going to be a low number. In this case, you see it as I raise the number, and you can certainly see it in the swatch, the size of that highlight expands. By lowering that number, the highlight minimizes. Okay, so we can make some adjustments. Right now, since we're down here, why don't we just remove this reflectivity? We don't want to worry about this right now. This is an annoyance that this is up. It's going to be the last thing I think that we'll take a look at, and it might be even as a more advanced sort of setup at the very end. So by looking at this, it's just a matter of making these little adjustments to get the specular highlight to look the way you want it to look. In this case, nice, bright, and fairly focused. It's difficult to see here. We can't ever trust our viewport, right? So we'll do a quick render, and we'll see what this looks like. Now I have a couple lights in the scene, so that certainly helps. Right? That's not bad. Not bad. That looks pretty good. I could probably make it a little bit smaller, a little bit tighter, and that might help make it look a little more glossy. Right now it looks a little bit like maybe a slightly frosted plastic. Okay, so I'm going to bring that down even smaller, down into the 0.1 zone, right? Call it 0.1. And my specular roll-off, which is sort of the brightness, the internal brightness of that highlight, how it rolls from being completely white in the center, 1, to not existing anymore to the outside. That's the speed at which that happens, right? Fast or slow. Okay, as we bring this up, it happens a little slower. As we bring it down, it happens quickly that it falls off. Okay, so that's what that setting is there. So between these two things, I like rounding numbers to something I can easily remember just in case. So 1 and 0.75, I just type that in. And I'm going to re-render this. Okay, I'm going to just drag a box over this. Now by default, Maya won't render that automatically. You'll have to click up here, render region. It says it down here. All right, so that's much tighter. It's looking better. So let's go with that. Maybe it's not looking transparent enough. I'm going to push that a little bit further, right? And then check it again. Pretty good. Or make somewhere in between there. Okay, color swatches and eccentricity. All right, so primarily this doesn't feel so bad in terms of a blue bottle with a nice bright specular highlight. We can see we're catching some of the nice edges here on the model. So in general, I'm going to say this isn't so bad. However, it isn't so great either, right? Because we don't have our label on here, which is what we really want to be worrying about. So let's close this out. Let's take a look at our bottle here. So what we want is a label right here in the center. At least that's what I want. I know in our reference it wraps around to the back. I'm just going to worry about the one in the center right now. So the first thing we want to do is we want to check our UVs. Okay, so let's look at that. I've got my UV texture editor loaded right here. And you can see that it's pretty clear that the bottle is unwrapped cylindrically from one side to the other. And then our bottom is loaded in down here. Okay, so we would like to put a label onto here. Now you might remember that if we had our other shader on here, I can find it here. There it is. Oh, there it goes. I'm going to drop that on there real quick. See, I can also middle mouse drag and drop. Sometimes conveniently I like to do that. When we look up at here, you'll notice that my UV check texture rolls very nicely over this edge, even though it's fairly of a fairly steep angle here coming in from the projection. So obviously the UVs have been edited to maintain this nice maintain squareness across this surface. So what we need to do is figure out where on this texture are we really going to be placing our label. Okay, so we can see here that we're going from 9 to blue 4, right? Somewhere in between blue 4 and 9 is our vertical zone. So when we roll back in here, okay, where's our yellow 9? There it is, and our blue 4. Okay, so we can see that, you can see that maybe not even maybe just over halfway up, right? Maybe here's the halfway mark, but just over halfway is where the top of our vertical section is. And then the rest of this rolls off into all of these little bumps in the top of the neck here. So we have to keep that in mind when we create this texture. So the first thing we would like to do is we want to make sure that we can create a texture here in the first place, right? And, you know, we could bump over to Photoshop and take a guess. You know, we'll make a square document and try to take a guess that it's going to fit somewhere in the square document where we can't even tell. But we can be much more sure about it by exporting an image of our UV layout. Okay, so when we look at this, we want to get this into Photoshop so we can place imagery on it without a problem. Okay, so what we want to do is with your object selected, and it has to be selected, right? Nothing there. Want to be able to see it. Object selected. We're going to go to polygons and all the way down here at the bottom. It would be nice if it was a little bit more obvious, but it's all the way at the bottom. UV snapshot, and that's just a picture of the UVs that you have here. So by default, I believe this number here is going to be something like 256 by 256 and things like that. And this is probably set to IFF by default. There's no reset button here. Oh, there it is. Okay, 256, my IFF. All right, so the first thing I want to do is I'm going to go through this. I want to name it properly, right? And you can see that this is going to my project directory here, right into my images folder, right? You can make this go wherever you want using browse. I'm just going to put it in there by default and just rename it to something that makes more sense. Bottle UVs. Now the X and Y size, you see that they kind of chase each other here because we can make it whatever it wants. It's going to keep it square. And that's because this checkbox here is checked, right? If I uncheck that, it does whatever it wants to do, and then it locks you into that aspect ratio, okay? You can see if I make it wildly different, it's going to maintain a different aspect ratio. I'm going to set these to 2048 and 2048. Nice high resolution texture. And then the next most important thing is to move down a little bit and choose PNG. So I'm going to hit OK. And with a little bit of a pause, with more complicated models and much larger pause, that gets us to our next step. So we're going to switch over to Photoshop here.
Shut up and sit down.